guys, it's Kat, and I have another ZBrush tutorial for you today. Now, what you see on the screen is a little charm, and it's just a text charm. So all it has is some text that I created within ZBrush, a little jump ring. I have another one just for showing you what this is, and then also a backplate that's grown a little bit larger than the text itself. And I do these quite a bit, so with people's names or a saying or something, it's very easy to do, and you could go in and go through another program like Photoshop to create an alpha and then create it from that. However, there are the tools within ZBrush to do it entirely within the program. So that's what we're going to do today. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here we go. The very first step of this project is to start out with a new project and also start with ZBrush. So we'll click ZBrush. It tells me that I'm already in an edit transform mode. I will switch and then go to the document menu and choose new document. I don't want to save changes. This is something I've already saved, so I'll click no. Now, make sure that you have ZBrush loaded over here in the tool palette, and then go to Z plugin. It's a second to the last menu from the right. Down at the bottom, and I am in ZBrush 2018. There is a free upgrade if you're on an older one, but it's already loaded here. It's not something I have to add into the program. Go ahead and click on Text 3D, and I can look at the different fonts right here where it starts up with the default of .muna, I guess. So you would click on that. You can't scroll, or at least on a Mac you can't scroll, but if you click up here on this gray box, you can pull this down, and I'm looking for a font called Cochin, I think. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's C-O-C-H-I-N. I like that one because it's sort of an elegant font, and I also would like the bold version of it. Now, to create the text, I'll click on New Text, and in this case, I'm just going to do this with Mom, and probably a good idea to start out with that one so we're all on the same page. Unless you're really adventurous, then type in what you want. The other thing is I did all caps. If you preferred lowercase, you could type M-O-M lowercase, or even initial cap with a capital M and then O and M, something like that. But I'll go back. I am going to do mine with all caps. So once I've done that, I can, let's see, hit return. And now the letters are loaded into my brush in effect. So if I click and drag on the background, you'll now see Mom. Then my first step before I do anything else is to press the letter T, which switches ZBrush into an editing mode. You could also click on the icon up here that says Edit, but I'll use the shortcut. I have actually in the beginning on ZBrush, I used to have a post-it note that said press T before you start anything, just as a reminder. So we now have the text here on the stage. But what are we working with? And we don't know at this point, so let's take a look at the underlying mesh. On the right-hand side, 5 up from the bottom, you should see a polyframe button. You can also get to this by pressing Shift F. It should have turned a color, and it also should have some lines on it. And that tells me a couple things. One is because this turned a color, it has already been converted into a polymesh 3D. The other thing is that since I can see these different colors on the sides, I can see that there's multiple polygroups. We're not going to be using that here, but that just tells me that I am working with the right format. And then I can see the lines, but with the triangles as they are, I can't sculpt on this at all. If I inflate it, it's not going to be right. I need to convert this into a more consistent mesh. So the way that we do that for this project is to go down here to the resolution, or it's over here under geometry. And I forgot to say that I have loaded in a custom interface here. I'll mention where to find these on the side, but if you'd like, you can download my configuration file. And then if you go up here to the preferences and then choose load UI, you can go out and find my file and load it in, and you'll have something just like you see here. So we're looking over here under the geometry palette for Dynamesh. And again, mine is down here at the bottom, so I'll just show you what we're using. I want to leave the default resolution at 128, and I'm doing that for a reason to show you kind of the result. I will make sure that polish is turned off, and I want to click Dynamesh. You can see that it meshed very quickly. I didn't have to wait, and there was no bar crawling across here at the top. it shows me that my active points are about 72,000 active points, which is a little bit low, but I'll show you in a minute how we're going to also tell that this is too low. Turn off your polyframe or press Shift F, and let's zoom in a little bit. Look at this edge along here, and you can see that there's a little bit of pixelization. I also know that from experience, the 72,000 is a little bit low. So let me undo, which on a Mac is Control-Z, Command-Z, on a PC it's a Control-Z. And then let's go ahead and bump the resolution up. I want to take this up to, let's just say 256 for grins and hit Enter. Now I'll click Dynamesh again, and I can see that the number of points up here jumped up to 291,000, and there wasn't a lot of change here. So you can see that it's less pixelization on the edges, but this is something I can work with. If I wanted to see what that mesh looked like, I could turn on the polyframe over here and look at the mesh, and that's a very fine mesh. It's going to do just fine for what we're creating. So turn that polyframe off, and then we'll zoom out. If you're new to ZBrush, a reminder on this, it's holding down Option on a Mac, Alt on a PC, hold, click with your mouse button and hold, and then release the key. So release Option or Alt, and then move your mouse in and out. So we have the letters Mom here. Eventually what's going to happen is I need another version of this behind it that I can blow up. So we need to duplicate this one, and to do that, we'll go over here to the Subtool palette and choose Duplicate. When we do that, it doesn't look like anything happened because the two subtools that we have are actually right on top of each other and exactly alike, so we don't see them. Make sure that your bottom one is actually selected. It'll be the one that's light gray. Then click on the Move mode up here, or press W to switch, and chances are you'll get this little gizmo thing, the little ball. And what I want to do is click on this blue arrow right here, click and drag until that's behind the other one. Now, if you don't see this little ball, make sure that your Gizmo 3D is turned on. You can toggle it on and off like that with this button. Now let's go to the front view and press the Shift key as we rotate around the object. And now we can't see the one that's behind it, but that's perfectly fine. So let's rename it just for housekeeping's sake. We have Mom up here, and then let's select the bottom one and then come down here in the Subtool palette and type Backplate. So I can tell at a glance which one is which. Oh, also I have my silver texture, I guess, or material selected. So if you'd like that as well, go ahead and click over here on Material and then choose the MAH or Ma Shiny. And so that's what I'm working with. You can tell that the back one is actually active. It's the active subtool because it's lighter. And then this front one is a little darker, so it's not selected. We want this back one to be selected. If it's not lighter, go over here and choose Backplate. And let's go to the front again and hold the Shift key. So the technique that we're using to increase the size of this and kind of grow it out is found under the Deformation palette. Now, if you're in my interface, I have Inflate down here at the bottom, or if you look under the Deformation palette, Inflate is right here. And so we'll do a couple steps to get this big, but we'll take this slider. We want to make sure that X, Y, and Z are all turned on. Then click and drag all the way over and see what happens to that back mom. And it's really messy looking. So if you zoom in, you can see that it's chunky and it's not very pretty. So let's click and drag using the Shift key again. And let's do something called Dynamesh. Let's re-Dynamesh this. Hold down Command on a Mac, Control on a PC. Click and drag a box on the background and release. And what that does is it redistributes the mesh again. We can then use another function called Polish Crisp Edges. Find that over here on the Deformation palette, or it's also down here on my interface. Click the little dot to the right until it's an open dot, and then click and drag over to maybe about 25 or so. And you'll see that that smoothed that out a great deal. Looks pretty good. So the next step, we're just repeating what we did last time, which was to inflate and then re-Dynamesh. So down here in my interface, or over here in the Deformation palette, click and drag again all the way over. Now re-Dynamesh, so hold Command or Control draw a box on the background, and you'll see that these start kind of merging together a bit. If we are paying attention to the size of our model, you can see that the number of active points now is a lot more. But don't worry about that for now. We'll fix that in a bit. Now on mine, I want to maybe polish those crisp edges again. So I'll drag this over a bit to maybe 20 or so. And then I'll inflate one more time. And it's roughly going to be the outer, I guess this is the outer border of our pendant. And I like that, it looks pretty good. So I'll re-Dynamesh one more time. So hold down Command or Control, draw a box on the background. And then we can polish those crisp edges again. Something like that. Now, another important concept when you're working with ZBrush and making jewelry is you want to decrease the size of this and see what it looks like actual size. And if the gizmo's in the way, you can just switch over to the draw mode or press Q. And even get a ruler and hold it up to your screen. And what you'll notice is what looks like a very wide border around this pendant. Once it's smaller, that border becomes much smaller. So it just depends on the look that you're going for. So I might even increase this one more time. So I'll inflate just a little bit more. And then re-Dynamesh, so Command or Control and re-Dynamesh. And then one last time, I'll polish crisp edges. So you can see now that these are merged together and we have this big balloon thing that's behind it. So the next step here is to take a slice of this, which will then become a flat back plate behind the word Mom. So click somewhere on the background and drag until you get to the side view and press Shift to lock in on the side view. And a couple different ways that we can do this. Well, one of the easiest is to be in the move mode. So press W or switch to move. And now we can hover over this little blue rectangle. And yours should be the same, but if it's a different color, you want it to be the axis that's going left to right. So I'm hovering over this blue rectangle, and then look down below where it says Scale Z Control to Clip. We're going to be using the clip command to basically cut off both sides of this. So hold down Command on a Mac or Control on a PC, click and drag this until it's probably a little bit to the left of this vertical line here. And now to get the other side, we just hold down Command or Control, click on the rectangle and drag it over until it's about equidistant on both sides of this vertical axis. Now you can click and drag to the front and see that we have a back plate. It's looking pretty good. Now there are a couple holes here, so these will come out kind of weird, so what we want to do is fill those. The easiest way that I found to do that is with an Inflate Brush. So let's switch to the draw mode, and then let's use a shortcut to get to the Inflate Brush. You'll type in B as in boy, I as in inflate, and N as in Nancy. So B-I-N will bring up the Inflate Brush, or you can just click here and then go find it. Once you get that up here, you have your cursor on your stage. Let's increase the size of our brush. So press the S key as in Sam, S, and that will bring up your draw size box. And just make it something kind of like this. Then click around and sort of draw around that. Stay away from the edges, but you just want to make this inflated, sort of a little bump on the surface, and do that until it looks something like this. It'll be raised up pretty significantly, but because we used the inflate command, it also did it to the back side. So now we're ready to actually remove those and make this perfectly flat. So let's switch to the move mode, and we have our gizmo again, and we're just doing the same thing except for doing this from an angle this time. So I'll hold down Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, click on this blue rectangle, and then go back towards this back plate. And I want to do that until I don't see anything on the surface. It should be perfectly flat. And then flip it around to the back, find the same view, hold down Command or Control, click, and then drag until you have a perfectly flat back plate. And now there's no holes, and now it's the right thickness throughout. Or not thickness, but everything is filled up. So let's go to the next step, which is going to be the thickness of our model. And to do this, there's a couple different ways I do this, but I'll show you one temporary way to do it, I guess. With the gizmo selected, we're in the move mode. We are going to lock these layers together and then resize them to be about the approximate size of our pendant. So to do that, look over here at these icons at the top and click on the far right-hand one. It turns from 1 bar to 3, which is going to basically transform all visible layers the same amount. So we want to increase the size of this, and when I'm working with ZBrush, I imagine that the units that are shown are actually millimeters. And it'll be a little bit different when we go back and play with Dynamesh in a minute, but we're going to increase this to a larger size, and then we can actually work with actual thicknesses. If you don't have my interface loaded, be sure and go to the geometry palette, which is over here, and at the very bottom, click size. You'll see that there's an XYZ size, and as we increase the size of this, we'll be able to watch what the size is. So I can zoom out a little bit, and then click and drag on the yellow square at the middle of the gizmo, like this, and I'm looking for about 20 millimeters. And I would encourage you to find some other pieces of jewelry and use a pair of calipers to see what size you think would be good. But on this one, I might do this about 20 millimeters. That's maybe a little bit more than 5/8 of an inch. If you wanted it to be bigger, then you could, maybe 1 inch is about 25 millimeters. But once I get this to be about 20 to 22 millimeters, in fact, let me go a little bit bigger, say 21 millimeters, then this is going to be approximately the right size. So the next step is to deselect this little icon up here. So if we do anything else to these, it's not going to affect all of them. Now we're ready to re-Dynamesh the back plate. So at this point, this is something that's a little bit of a weird concept, but when we were working with a very small model, we needed a very high resolution of Dynamesh. Now that we've increased the size of our model, we need to bump that Dynamesh resolution down. I can tell that the back plate is chosen. So let's go to the resolution right now, which says 256, and let's type in 32 and hit enter. Now it hasn't done anything, we have to re-Dynamesh. But let's zoom in just a little bit and watch the edge to see what happens. So I'll re-Dynamesh by holding down Command or Control and drawing a box on the background, and then watch what happens. That edge got very, very ugly. So I'll undo, so Command Z or Control Z or whatever it is on your computer, and let me go ahead and type something bigger. And this was really bad, so I'll maybe jump up to 60. Well, it didn't like the number 60, so it went up the next step, which was 64. Now I'll re-Dynamesh and just watch to see what that edge looks like, and it's a lot cleaner. And the reality of that is it's pretty good. I'm looking at my active points up here, which are back up at what we had, which was about 253. We had 291 before, but that's a fine resolution for what we're doing. Now we need to re-Dynamesh the mom, so we need to switch to this other piece. You can also do that. There's a shortcut, which is holding Option or Alt and then clicking on the letters. And you can see that that went from a light colored backplate to now that we had a light color letter. I can also see back here on the background, you can see there's some little shadows back there. I can fix those in a minute. Let me check the back real fast, and it has the same thing. So we'll actually clean that up before we do the next step. So now let's Dynamesh this front piece, and I think we figured out that 64 was a good resolution, so let's type in 64, and then re-Dynamesh by holding Command or Control and clicking and dragging on the background. It doesn't work, by the way, if you click and drag on the object. So that looks pretty good. This is still pretty clean. And so let's go back to that backplate and fix it. Let's use our shortcut again, though, which is Option or Alt, and click on the backplate to make it active. So the way that we'll fix this backplate is the same way that we created it in the first place. So let's get a good diagonal view and hold down Command or Control and then click this little rectangle and then go back. And you can see now that's cleaned up. And let's go to the back side and do the same thing. We're looking for that little rectangle or little box. Hold down Command or Control and just bring that in until those are gone. So that looks pretty good. And now is the fun part because we get to make these actual size. So with our charm, what we want is we want a back plate that's about 1.2 millimeters, and the front will be about 1.4. And so it'll give us a thickness of a charm, which is about 1.6 millimeters, which is hefty enough to feel like it's a quality pendant. And then you can tweak it, if you cast these and they're too heavy or whatever, you can tweak from there. But most of mine that I make these days, the back plates are about 1.2 millimeters. That also allows me to put a sufficiently thick jump ring on it. So to do this, we have this selected. We can go over here to our size under the geometry palette, or I've got it over here, and I'm looking for the Z size. So I can see if I hover over this blue arrow, that is the Z axis. And it tells me that the thickness of this right now is 0.21 millimeters. I know that I want that to be 1.2, so let me type 1.2 and then hit enter, and that is the thickness of my back plate. So let's zoom out, and the thickness I want of this other piece, I want it to be, let's do 0.4 millimeters. We'll go a little bit thicker than that though, so when these are intersecting, there's maybe about 0.2 millimeters of an overlap. Hold down Option or Alt and click on this front piece, and we'll do the same exact thing. Either change your size here, or if you have my interface, go down here. So I'll type in 0.42 and then hit enter. And now I can see that that's pretty thick. We will do one more thing with that before we go much further though. Let's actually round this off. So let's say that I want to round this piece, round this top edge, but I want the back part to be flat. So let's use that Polish Crisp Edges again, which you can find over here under the Deformation palette, looking for Polish Crisp Edges, and make sure that that little dot is clicked so it's open. Then I would like to drag this over maybe to about 15 and see what happens. That should give me a sufficiently round piece, and that looks pretty good. There's another issue with this though, which is these are very thin. And so if we've raised this up from the surface of a pendant, if these are too small, sometimes that can cause problems when making a rubber mold. So let's go ahead and thicken those while we're here. And we'll do that with the Inflate command. Again, it's one I use a lot, so it's down here on my interface, but we'll just click and drag and just thicken that up a bit. So it's going to stick out and we won't have any problems with this. One more thing we'd like to do is to flatten that back. So before we do that, let's go ahead and re-Dynamesh. So hold down Command or Control and then click and drag on the background, and that'll give it a good fresh mesh before we do the next step. And then I can hold down my Command or Control and click on this box and just drag it up, and you'll have to go a little bit further than you think. There you go. And if you have to do it again, just make it so that is, in fact, let's try something else also. If you click on this third icon right here, it will center it in the middle of this piece, and that makes this easier. Hold down Command or Control, click and drag, and then just make sure that the fall off on these edges, that it comes down and then it drops straight down, and then you have a flat edge. Now we can go back and adjust the size. So under the Geometry palette up here, or on my interface over here, we want to make that 0.42 and hit enter. So there we have our mom. It's looking pretty good, and we have a back plate. Let's do one more thing to the back plate too. I'm seeing something's a little bit weird right here. So let me turn on the mesh. Draw the polyframe by turning on Shift F, but it actually has mom selected. So let's switch to the back plate by holding Option or Alt. Click on the background, and you can see that it has these stretched rectangles or polygons. So let's apply a fresh mesh to this as well. Hold Command or Control, click and draw a box on the background, and now you can see it's put a nice even mesh. Let's turn off the mesh real quick, and I need to smooth this out, so let's use Polish Crisp Edges again. Either go down to the Deformation palette and look for Polish Crisp Edges. It'll be up here, Polish Crisp Edges. Make sure that that little dot is open. And then let's go maybe about 20 on this. I'm just eyeballing it. And I might actually go a little bit more, maybe add another 5 to it, 5 or 6. So that gives me a nice rounded edge. I could go even more. There we go. And so now we have this piece done. Let's double check our thickness again. So the back plate is 1.19, which is good. And then that front one we know is correct as well. So now it's just time to merge both together. Let's make the Mom subtool the active one. Hold down Option or Alt and click on it. And now let's move it down towards the other one. Just use that blue arrow and move it down. Now we're not really sure about how deep that is or anything, so let's turn on another mode that's really useful. Fourth up from the bottom over here is transparency, or activate edit opacity, but just the transparency. When you do that, you can see the ghosted out back plate, and you can see also that this front piece is almost embedded in it. It's very little amount. So we're going to turn off the gizmo and use the old transpose line, which is how we can actually measure. So click on the gizmo, and we need to get this basically anchored onto this other piece. And to do that, it has to be active. So press Option or Alt and click on the back plate to make it active. Now, what you want to do is click on the background and rotate this so we can see somewhere in front. It's basically in front of a letter, and you don't want it to be on the rounded edge. You want it to be somewhere here in the middle. Just click once, click and drag, and then press the Shift key once you get to the side, and now we can see how high this other piece is. And I can see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little bit more. So I need to make this one active. So I'll hold down Option or Alt and click on the Mom again. And now, by clicking on this middle circle, click and hold the Shift key, we can move this down until it lines up with the fourth little notch here. So we'll count 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, interesting. 1, 2, 3, 4. It needs to come down just a little. So I'll bring it down, let's say 4.5. Somewhere around there. Anywhere from probably 4 to 5 is a good height. And so now we know that our back plate is 1.2 millimeters thick. Our front is sticking out about 4.5 millimeters. And sometimes you'll have instructions from companies like Shapeways might tell you that your text needs to be a certain amount up off the surface or your decoration. So now everything is lined up perfectly and we're ready to put a jump ring on. So let's keep transparency turned on for the moment and close up our deformation palette, and let's go look for the subtool palette again up towards the top. Now we need to append another piece. So over here towards the bottom, look for the append function and insert a ring 3D. So we can see that the ring is right here in the middle, but it's not active. And remember, the shortcut to make this active is to hold down Option or Alt and then click on the jump ring, and it's now active and everything else is ghosted out. So we need to rotate this guy. So we'll click and drag on the background and press Shift until we're looking at a side view. And you can zoom in. Then turn the gizmo on because gizmo's easier for this operation. Click and drag on the white circle, but press the Shift key to make sure it's in a vertical position. And now let's move this up. You can grab these little corners here. Just move it up into the top position up here. And we'll be thickening this in a minute, so we don't have an exact size, but just somewhere up here. Now, I know from the things that I've looked at that these little jump rings at the top, if you're going to add another jump ring, a soldered one, these are probably going to be about maybe 3.5 millimeters, something like that, and then a thickness of maybe 1.25. So let's go over to the geometry palette again and look at the size. Or I can use mine over here. But let's say that that size is 3.5 millimeters. And it looks a little bit big, but one thing to notice is that the Z size is 0.69, so almost 0.7, which is too thin. And again, if you're printing at Shapeways, or I know, for example, from my experience casting, that if it's less than 1 millimeter, I usually get incomplete casts on the jump ring. So in order to increase the size, instead of just adjusting the Z size, we could do that later, but we'll go to the deformation palette again and use Inflate. So just click and drag this all the way over, and you can watch the size on my interface that's over here, and just inflate that a couple times. And once I do that twice, if I've started out with a 3.5 millimeter jump ring, and then I increase the size twice with Inflate, I know that that'll be approximately 4 millimeters with a thickness of 1.2 millimeters, which is the same as our back plate. Now looking at this, there is one other problem, which is this is very faceted. So it's not clean, not pretty. So we're going to use the divide command. We'll close deformation over here and switch back over to the geometry palette and look for the divide command. And what this will do, and it took me a while to actually figure it out, but it will divide the geometry. I can use it maybe 2 or 3 times to smooth it, and then I delete the lower subdivisions. So let's divide 3 times. So we'll go divide, there's 1, divide again, there's 2, and that's actually smooth enough for what we're doing. We could divide it 1 more time, but I think I always shoot for about 33,000 points on this when I do it. Now I don't need the lower subdivisions of this, so I'll go ahead and delete lower. You can see here there's a little slider that shows the subdivisions, so I'll delete the lower ones, and all I'm left with is this smooth, pretty one. Now I just need to do a little bit of fine tuning. So I'll click on the background and drag to the side and hold the Shift key. And if I look at the back, I can see that my ring is not sticking out, but on the front, it's interfering a little bit with the design. So what I'll do is I will use the green rectangle or cube here. There we go. And I might shrink that a little bit so it doesn't interfere all that much, and that looks pretty good. If you want to turn transparency off, 4th from the bottom, you can do that. And the truth is I used to try and get this cleaner, but if you zoom all the way out, remember, look at this at real size, turn the draw mode on, you can't tell. So it's something that you could get real picky about, but I can tell you that this works just fine. And so there's our jump ring. I also do want to do one more thing, which is to move this up just a tad. So I'll switch to the move mode. I have the gizmo selected, and then I'll click and drag until this is probably about right here. So it's sufficiently embedded, and that looks good. And there's our mom charm. So if you're ready now, if you like what you've done, you can take this and merge all of these together. In fact, what I tend to do is on my first printing run, I'll merge them together, but I don't re-Dynamesh. And here's what's going on. Let's go to the top subtool and let's merge down, which is here in the subtool palette. So look for merge. You can merge down. It will tell you it's an undoable operation, but that's not true. You click always OK, and then we'll merge down one more time, and now all of these pieces are stuck together. However, remember it said this is it's not an undoable operation, and I said that's not true. The reason is because you can still use the split command to split these back up. So what I usually do is I'll print one of these just like it is. And in printing it, I'll make sure that this is high enough and that, you know, I can actually see the design. If it's not, then I'll go back and I'll split these, use split to similar parts. It says it's undoable. That's not true. But anyway, here's your piece, and it is now all in separate pieces. I want the mom to stick together, so I would click on this O, not the jump ring, but the O, and close split and go to merge and merge down and then merge down again. So at least mom now is all on one layer. Now I can go back through the operation we did before to raise this up a little bit. So I might go in like this, switch to the move mode, and then maybe use this to go up just a little bit. You can measure again if you want, but then let's say, this printed perfectly, so this is what I want to keep. Now, if I merge these all together, can merge down and merge down, that's now one complete piece. But the last thing we want to do is we want to Dynamesh it, which will formally merge these together. So if I zoom in and look, where these meet, watch what happens. I'll hold down Command or Control, click and drag, and you can see that that now is merged together. And in the beginning, I think I would go back and smooth these out, use my Shift key and a clay brush or whatever. But the truth is once this is very small, you're not going to see that at all. The resolution is such that it hides it. So that is how you make your mom charm. So let's say I wanted to actually export this, and it depends on how you want this. For example, if I'm sending to my Formlabs printer, I just use export up here at the top. And then I could go out to the desktop and I could say it's my mom 4 and click save. And that's it. I do know from experience that this one, once I take it into my Preform app, if I open this up and I go out to the desktop where I stuck it, if I can find it, there it is, mom 4. It takes a second to load it. And sometimes it'll tell you that the mesh is broken or needs to be repaired. And that's because you didn't do that final step of Dynameshing. But anyway, so there's my mom charm. Then I can click it. And within my program, I can say I want one-click printing. And it will orient it and add supports. And I don't want to print it right now. But you can see that there it's ready to go, and it is a nice little charm. I also know that my print surface is about 6 by 6. So this charm being, maybe less than an inch, I do know that this is correct. There is your mom charm. You might check another one of my tutorials, which is for bezel setting a stone, because a nice thing that you can do with this is add a stone to it. And I'll show you here. I did one, let's see, don't want to save changes. But here I did one that was for a bracelet. I could curve this on my mandrel, and then also I have a little bezel setting for a stone. So it just depends on what you want to do with this, but you could have one jump ring at the top, you could have 2 jump rings up here on the corners, that's a popular look right now, or you can even add larger jump rings on the side so it has maybe a wire bangle band for it, and then you have a bracelet. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, just put them in the notes down below, and thanks for watching, and happy ZBrushing.